I really think that the Cain and Abel story is the most profound story I've ever read. I really think that the Cain and Abel story is the most profound story I've ever read. Adam and Eve are not the first two human beings. Cain and Abel are the first two human beings. Humanity enters history at the end of the story of Adam and Eve, and then the archetypal patterns for human behavior are instantaneously presented. So that's the first two human beings. The resentful, bitter failure taking an axe to the admirable success. The motif of sacrifice is there in the Old Testament. It's so concrete. The sacrifices that Cain and Abel were making were dramatic precursors to the psychological idea of sacrifice that we all hold as civilized people in the modern world. If things are not laying themselves out for us as they should be, then we cannot curse God. We have to look to ourselves. By making today a little less impulsively pleasurable, shall we say, you'll make tomorrow a little bit more secure and productive. And so you make the sacrifices that are necessary, and you set up the future. In terms of the thing you could sacrifice, well, your best animal, that's good. Well, how about you? How about your child? How about you? The greatest of all possible sacrifices is self and child. Of that, there can be no doubt. Pain and suffering define the world. Of that, equally, there can be no doubt. The person who wants to alleviate suffering, who wants to bring about the best of all possible futures, who wants to create heaven on earth, will therefore sacrifice everything he has to God, to life in the truth. We're out in history now. We're not in some archetypal beyond. We're full-fledged human beings. And then the archetypal patterns for human behavior are instantaneously presented. And Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. There's the first human being, Cain. And again, she bare his brother Abel. And Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And I think that's part of the critical issue here, because a shepherd takes care of sheep, and they're edible, and the lambs are very vulnerable, and there were lots of wild animals around. There were lions, and you had a slingshot or a stick or some damn thing, and so your job was to keep the sheep organized and not let them be eaten by the lions alone. And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. Okay, so he's participating in this sacrificial ritual. And Abel, he brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. Now, you don't know why that is, and this is a built-in ambiguity, I think. You don't know that Abel's sacrifice is low quality. There isn't a sentence there that talks about how high quality Cain's sacrifice is. But in any case, the Lord had respect unto Abel and his offering. There's a hint that Abel's putting a little bit more into the whole sacrificial thing than Cain, but there's also a hint that maybe God is just liking you a little better than he's liking him. And that's, I think, useful from a literary perspective, because there is that arbitrariness about life. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and his offering. But unto Cain and his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, angry, resentful that his hard work is being rejected by God. Now that's worth thinking about. Because you think about how human that story is, You might be a useless character, and, you're whining about how catastrophic your life is, and it's pretty much obvious to everyone around you and you that it's your fault. You just don't try. You don't wake up in the morning, you don't get a job, you don't engage in things, you're cynical and you're bitter and you're angry, and you don't try to help the people near you, and you don't try to fix up your own life, and you don't take care of yourself, and, and then things go wrong, and it's like, well, really, what do you expect? But that doesn't mean someone in that situation will just say, well, that's okay, I deserve it, and they'll be happy about it. They won't. They'll be absolutely bitter about it and angry. But if things are not laying themselves out for us as they should be, then we cannot curse God. We have to look to ourselves. Well, and you think, well, why not curse God? You take on the responsibility yourself and you attempt to lay it at the feet of either society or being itself, then you instantly start to act in a way that makes everything much worse. Not only for you, but for everyone else, and maybe even for being itself. It's not helpful. It's like you can fall afoul of God because your sacrifices are second rate, or you can just fall afoul of God and you don't know why. Well, tough luck for you. And then what happens in either case is exactly this, almost inevitably. Cain was wroth and his countenance fell. You know, you can have some sympathy for Cain. So it's not like you're Cain and you're Abel and you're Cain and you're Abel. It's like you're half and half and you're half and half. It's something like this. This is two different potential patterns of destiny. And you don't manifest one purely and the other zero. It's like, and Cain was very wroth and his countenance fell. Grateful and inquiring posture. Because that's what a prayer for posture should be. It should be grateful and inquiring. And grateful is, thank God things aren't worse for me than they are. How could I make things better? It's something like that. And that's like, what sacrifices do I need to make in order to make things better? That's a good question to ask yourself. You could ask yourself that every morning. If you just have a miserable life, you're just going to suffer stupidly and get bitter about it. That's what happens to Cain. It's like, well, how about not doing that? How about making a sacrifice and seeing if you can please God and put being on track? And the Lord said unto Cain, why art thou wroth? And why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted. Now that's an interesting line. Because God says to him, if you do well, won't you be accepted? Well, there's a hint there, right? It's something like, well, things aren't going so well for you. You're not doing well. Well, does that mean you're not doing good? Does that not mean you're not acting properly? God is suggesting that if you were doing it properly, you would be successful. If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted. And if thou doest not well, then sin lies at your door. The next line is, and unto thee shall be his desire. Yes. What God actually says is something like this, is like, you know, things aren't going so well for you, but if you were behaving properly, they would. But instead, this is what you've done. Sin came to your door, and sin means to, you know, pull your arrow back and to miss the target. Sin came to your door. But he uses a metaphor, and the metaphor is something like, sin came to your door like this sexually aroused cat, predator thing. You invited it in first, and then you let it have its way with you. He uses a sexual metaphor. He entered into a creative exchange with it and gave birth to something as a consequence, and that what you gave birth to, that's your life. And you knew it. You're self-conscious after all. You knew you were doing this, but God's idea was, not only are you not doing well because you're not doing well, but you're not doing well because you've actually really spent a lot of work figuring out how to not do well. This is like creative effort on your part. Well, so Cain, he's obviously not very happy about this whole answer, obviously, because the last thing you want to hear if your life is turned into a catastrophe and you take God to task for creating a universe where that sort of thing was allowed, is that it's your own damn fault and you should straighten up and fly right, so to speak, and you shouldn't be complaining about the nature of being, the story reveals. And Cain talked with Abel, his brother. And it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and slew him. Right, so it's a psychological story too. And you see this in the cynicism that people have about people who have done well in the world. They're always looking for some reason why they've done well. They must be crooked, or they must be conniving, or they must be arrogant, or they must be psychopathic, and of course all of those things exist. But it's a very bad trick to play on yourself to make the proposition that the person in the world who represents your own ideal is that ideal because of despicable reasons. Because what you do is train yourself that the ideal that you should pursue can only exist if it's motivated by despicable reasons. And then what? Not only is Abel, your brother, dead as your brother in the field in reality, but you've also slaughtered your own ideal. Well, then what the hell are you going to work for? Well, how are you going to live then? bitterly, miserably, and hopelessly. That's how you're going to live. And that's part of why this is such a profound story. So that's the first two human beings. The resentful, bitter failure taking an axe to the admirable success. And the Lord said unto Cain, where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, what hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. Now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. And Cain said unto the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this is that, the punishment that God lays on Cain it's like the inevitable consequences of Cain's action. It's something like that. It's like, well, he killed his brother. There's no going back from that, man. Like, good luck forgiving yourself for that, especially if he was an ideal, especially if he was your ideal, because you haven't just killed your brother and, of course, tortured your parents and the rest of your family. You've deprived the community of someone who is upstanding, and you did it for the worst possible motivations. It's like, there's no up from there, right? That's as close to hell as you can manage on earth. And Cain said unto the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid. There's also no turning back to God, let's say, after an error like that, because, well, you've done everything you possibly could to spite God. And the probability that you're going to be able to mend that relationship in your now broken state, when you couldn't mend it to begin with before you did something so terrible, starts to move towards zero. And that's pretty much the story of Cain and Abel. And it's a hell of a story. I think it's worth thinking about forever, because usefully revealing of those facets is the potential for the story, once understood, to shed light on not your own failure, not even on your rejection by being, let's say, but on the proclivity to murder the best and the best in you for revenge upon that violation.